So, hi everyone. Welcome back to the Academy of Advanced Thought. This is, I think, probably the 41st episode, something like that. Matthias Desmet was the last one around mass formation psychosis, which was interesting. And funnily enough, one of the people that I was mentioning him to was Ellie McKay, who is now joining me from the On a Mission podcast, which I also did one of. I can't even remember when that was. Was that a few months ago? I think 2 months ago.
Yeah, it was last year. We'll need to stick a link to that in the show notes as well, because it was a brilliant episode.
Yes, let's do that. That's actually a good thing. I'll put it in the comments of this as well. So yes, so anyway, today we're joined with Ellie, and I only have one question that I have no idea in the next 45 minutes where this is going to go. So, but I know the starting point. So that's great. Let's go there. And Ellie, for those who don't know you, it would be great to hear what it is that you do, but more importantly, why you do what you do. Because when I experienced you for the first time and then we spoke, there seems to be, on the outside, it looks like you have content that you create, podcasts with interesting people, but then when we spoke, I realized that the way that we think about things has some similarities, and there seems to be a lot more underneath it than just another podcast. So anyway, give the people some insight. Go for it.
So you started me off with a nice, easy question, and why do I do what I do? It's like the $1 million question. I'm just like, where do you even start? So it's a little bit of context. Great to be here. Thanks for having me, John. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. So I'm Ellie McKay. Originally, I was sort of best known for property, and the reason I mentioned the real estate element of it is because, as with most entrepreneurs, there's been a bit of a roller coaster, and actually what a lot of your listeners and actually a lot of my followers may not realize is that less than 4 years ago, I was actually claiming job seekers allowance. I don't know what your equivalent in Oz is, but I experienced the ultimate humiliation of walking through those double doors with my double pram. I had 3 children under the age of 5. I had a 1-year-old, and my youngest son was a few months old when I actually found out that whilst I was still on maternity leave, that I was getting made redundant from my career working in the prisons, which I'd done for just slightly over 9 years. And it's one of those classic examples of the worst day turning out, with the benefit of hindsight, of being the best day. Although it doesn't always feel like that at the time, that is the caveat. And by the time my maternity leave came to an end, I'd already made the decision that I was going to get involved with property. And there was a bit of an interim period where I was literally there, sitting there. I remember looking at my 2 children as I'm filling out, for anyone who's ever had to, the bureaucracy and red tape of getting anything from the government in the UK is, I'd imagine it's pretty similar anywhere, but they're literally filling out reams and reams of paperwork to literally get £70 a week. But my mentality at the time wasn't so much for the £70 a week. I believed, having never been a business owner, having not really worked on evolving my own mindset, very, very limited in terms of my long-term vision, that I needed to do this in order to get my national insurance contribution to be able to secure my pension. And that was literally the entirety of my thinking at the moment at that time. And I went on to use the last of my redundancy money. It wasn't a huge amount. I remember I got £7,000, and I spent that £7,000 to the penny, putting my husband and I on this property training course. Don't get me wrong, we weren't destitute. We were your stereotypical middle class. We had a nice attached house. We had 2 nice cars, fuck all in the bank. We used to go a couple of nice holidays in a year, but we in terms of financial planning and accruing serious wealth, we were absolutely clueless. And I went on the property training that I did at the time was as much about mindset as anything else. And it really sort of showed me that if something was humanly possible, it was within our reach. But in terms of my own mental health at the time, and this is something that I'm hugely passionate about, I was struggling with postnatal depression. I had really bad anxiety. Some days it was literally a struggle to even leave the house. So my self-confidence was absolutely on the floor. And had my husband not went with me, there's no way I would have actually had the confidence to sort of embark on this journey. Very, very low self-esteem. But yeah, long story short, we did the property training. Within 4 days, we bought 2 properties, no money down, and went on to buy 25 properties in our first year. And to go full circle, the reason that's important is because you ask what I do, and I do have quite a big online presence now, and I've sort of accidentally fallen down the route of having quite a large personal brand, but that has changed and evolved a hell of a lot over the 4 years. Because when I first started putting myself out there, the best bit of advice I got from one of my mentors was that very simply, people need to know who you are in order to do business with you. And what better way to convey that message on a one-to-many basis than through social media, which, as we were chatting about before we hit record, it has its upsides and it has its downsides. But I kind of amazed myself by focusing on LinkedIn primarily at that point, that without any sort of track record, without telling any lies, by being my authentic self online, sharing the trials and tribulations of being a mum to 3 young children while trying to build the business and be present and focused and all the other stuff. And much to my amazement, Jonathan, I raised £4 million in private investment within our first 12 months, which enabled us to fund the 25 projects that I referred to earlier. But when I mentioned that it's changed, what I actually found, the more that I was doing this, and this was never the intention, it genuinely wasn't the intention. My intention was to raise finance, cold hard cash. That was it. But as I started sharing a bit more about myself and the vulnerabilities and the challenges I'd had with depression and anxiety, and taking people on, it sounds really cliche, but it's the truth, taking people on my own personal journey as I was evolving my mindset and things like that, people were finding it very relatable. And I was started to get a lot of messages from people telling me that they had my post had actually stopped them from committing suicide, from going getting help, giving them the inspiration to set up their own businesses, or that it really got them out of a dark spot. And I think gradually I realized that my definition of success was no longer what I had previously thought it was, which was just to acquire loads of properties and amass our own financial wealth, and started becoming aware of the impact that I could potentially have to sort of improve the lives of other people. So if I'm being perfectly honest, it was a complete fluke.
Wow. Well, I didn't know half that. I didn't know 90% of that story. So that I that's amazing. And I mean, not only is the fact that you did this with a young family, and anyone here who thinks that being a mother isn't a full-time job in and of itself is evidently has never had kids, but even with a partner, it's still a full-time job. So there's that on top of everything else. I mean, I've only got 2 kids, and I think their mother was one of the examples that I then learned from, despite the fact that we then, we didn't stay together forever, but I've got 100% admiration for any mothers anyway. So there's that, due to the fact that that's a 24-hour job. But the other thing is that how the speed of turnaround there is quite miraculous. I think my fastest turnaround from nothing to something used to be about 60 months, and I've got it down to about 24 months. But I can't believe a 12-month turnaround is. What? Tell me about that. Tell me about that year. So the signing on day to the X million raise. What was that period of time like?
It's really weird. It was quite funny because we did this. It was quite a prestigious course that we did, and we were sat there having our graduation ceremony, and they bring you your glass of champagne, you get your certificate, and all of that. And my phone, I got a ping, an alert coming through, and it was just reminding me of my job centre appointment for the following day. And I was like, "Oh my god, talk about a fall from grace!" And my husband and I were kind of chuckling, like, "Oh, little did they know," sort of thing, And I'm not advising other people to do what we did, because my my threshold is very high. We do have a burn the ships, go all in, go big or go home sort of mentality, which absolutely isn't for anyone. And actually, our very first property, I mentioned that we got 2 properties within the first 4 days. One of those properties, we drew down money on a credit card. We're like, oh my god, you can get money for 3%. This is amazing. You know, we basically bought it through that. That's what financed the refurbishment. And people thought we were crazy. You can imagine, people thought we were insane. But we made £20,000, which was a lot of money from us from doing that. From doing that transaction. And we learned about leveraging money. And, you know, again, I think it's important to say you need to know what you're doing. My husband, although we were new to property, he had other businesses from years before. He's very financially astute and very risk averse, although it might not sound it. So he always underestimates what we're going to get in terms of, you know, overestimates our refurb cost, underestimates our end market values and what have you. So we mitigated the risk as much as you can do. But obviously any investment does have a risk, blah, 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 not advising anyone else to do it. But I mean, for me, and this is something that I absolutely champion, your business can only grow at the same extent that you do. And my reality was, I was told a story on day 1 of my property training by my mentor at the time, who is now, we are just launching a business together, which, by the way, after we finished that course, I'm very woo-woo. I said to my husband, Billy, who was one of the 2 business partners who did the training, I said, Billy and I will launch a business together. And my husband's like, what business are you going to do? You know, and I'm like, I don't know the details, but at some point within the next 5 years, Billy and I will launch a business together. Of that, I'm certain. And Billy and I are launching a business together. So yeah, that's really interesting. But he told me a story about Darren Hardy, who, for any of your listeners who are not familiar with Darren, he was the editor of Success magazine, wildly successful guy, best-selling author. He wrote The Compound Effect. And the story was, he went to his then mentor, one of the all-time greats, in my opinion, Jim Rohn, the late Jim Rohn, with a 40-page front and back detailed list of his perfect woman. And he said to Jim, what do I need to do to attract a woman like this into my life? And Jim said to him, Darren, you're asking the wrong question. The question that you need to ask yourself is, who do I need to become to attract a woman like that into your life? And he went through all of these lists of qualities and values and attributes and measured himself against those qualities and actually set to work on becoming that person. And in almost eerie detail, his now wife appeared into his life. And when I looked into the mirror, the old accountability mirror, because let's be honest, Jonathan, you can't bullshit yourself. We can bullshit everyone else, but we cannot bullshit ourselves. When I looked into that mirror, and I asked myself the question, am I somebody that I would do business with? Do I demonstrate those qualities? Would I go out and lend myself hundreds of thousands of pounds or millions of pounds? You know, I could barely get myself dressed and get out the door. And the answer was no. The brutal answer to that was no. And in that first 12 months, I worked far more on becoming the person that I wanted to be. And it wasn't an overnight process, far more than the time I actually put into the business. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows either. And I think it's important to say that, because mindset is something that needs to be worked on bit by bit, day by day. And I actually went to a Grant Cardone 10X conference that was over in the UK here in Glasgow. And I love Grant, he's brilliant. And one of the things he was talking about was mental health and how he thinks that globally we're far too reliant on prescription medication, which I completely agree with. Now, I was on all sorts of heavy duty amitriptyline and God knows what else at the time. And I was there feeling all pumped up and like, yeah, this is, you know, mind over matter. I'm going to do this. And I came off all my medication without speaking to a doctor, without gradually reducing it, and was left pretty close to suicidal. So it's interesting how your definition of success changes as you evolve. Because success for me at that time was literally getting out of bed, and it was putting one foot in front of the other. And this is why what you see in social media is not necessarily a true reflection of what's going on, because I was there posting, if I did one thing in a day, I would post on LinkedIn, but the rest of the day I might have spent in bed, really trying to resist the urge to kill myself, because I truly believed at that time that my husband and my children would be better off without me. And that's why I'm so passionate about speaking openly about this.
Well, I'm glad that you're around to do so. One of the questions that came up as you've been speaking is that how do you sit with comparison? Some of us have if I had a magic wand, one of the things that I would obliterate from the world is our comparisons that we draw. So this person has that and I don't, or this person's achieved that and I haven't. And it's all right for you because you've got that, but I don't. In this journey of yours, especially let's say in the property side of things, where you probably were aware of people, maybe some of the presenters or other people have said, look, I bought a portfolio of 396 properties and I make 2.5 million yield per year and blah, blah, blah. And are you still, or were you ever triggered by comparisons that made you feel that you weren't enough, even when you've kind of got on the up again? Does that still creep in and you think, well, yeah, but we've only got this, but they've got that, or if I'd have done that, then I wouldn't, if I hadn't have done this, chosen this path, then I would have gone there. How do you sit with comparison?
Something, you're completely right. And if I'm being brutally honest, I don't know if it ever fully goes, because as a high performance person, I definitely have competitive part of me that does love to be the best. And I'm the first one to say that the only person that we're in competition with ultimately is ourselves. Yeah. And I am genuinely only trying to be better than the person that I was yesterday. Something that I found really helpful is measuring my success from 3 months ago, not just in terms of financial achievements. What have I learned? How have I grown? And something that's been huge for me is the power of journaling, because we don't often recognize in ourselves how far we've come. We can recognize it in other people, but we can definitely be our own worst enemies. Does it still creep in? Absolutely. Because the more I evolve, like you say, there's always someone that's, you buy an airplane, somebody else is buying a bigger airplane, unless you literally get to that number one spot. And what is that number one spot? That's a very interesting question. Then, where does it end? Like we're now, I mentioned we were buying like small buy-to-let properties, typically under £100,000 here in England. They weren't high value residential properties. Now we're buying hotels and doing land and new build developments. But then I speak to one of my friends, and if we're working on 10 houses, they're working on 1,000 houses. But I would say that 95% of the time I'm motivated and inspired to see what's possible when I look at what other people are achieving. And I genuinely think that having that abundant mindset and genuinely supporting and empowering other people is something that I've found is actually crucial for your success. But so I never begrudge anyone else's success, but sometimes those feelings do creep in where you feel like I should be doing more. Not a case of why not me, because I think that people are exactly where they deserve to be at life. But sometimes we can beat ourselves up a little bit, or I'll see somebody coming in. I mean, I'm only 4 years into this crazy journey. I'll see somebody that's 2 years in and they're already a multimillionaire. And you think, bloody hell, how have they managed to do that? There is always someone bigger and better. But I definitely feel that, again, going back to the original point, the more that you work on yourself and the more that you're so my number one goal for 2022 was to be happy. That was my first goal. And we had challenges last year. We continue to have challenges, as we all have done throughout COVID. One of our businesses was completely obliterated. And we had another business launch that did really, really well and sort of supported that business. And we got screwed over by a big contract there. And sometimes you feel like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And the property business has continued to grow and continued to grow. But I stepped back, pretty much took all of December off and reevaluated what was important to me. And the top priority was not the shiny penny. But here's the irony of the whole thing. The more I focused on the happiness and the joy element of my life, enjoying the journey, again, another cliche, but it's a cliche because it's so important, which I definitely wasn't doing before. It was just on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. The number one priority was to live life with joy and ease, and we made more money in January than we did in the last 18 months combined. Right. So it's really interesting. I turned down every speaking gig that I was offered. I turned down business partnerships, investment opportunities. I literally cleared my diary to the point I was uncomfortably bored at some point, because I knew I needed to create space for bigger and better opportunities to come in, which is quite a bold move to make when you don't really have a strategy and you've got your mentors and coaches looking at you like you've got two heads. Yeah, but it worked.
Well, and funnily enough, actually, that's beautifully caveating into my take on what you said in terms of the strategy. Actually, the strategy, let's unpack the term abundant mindset or growth mindset, and that being a strategy and giving yourself enough space and to management of your own energy to allow those opportunities. The way that I view capital, for instance, is something that, and for anyone who's read Rich Dad Poor Dad would know that, there's converse views that you can have of capital and asset. And so, for instance, I don't see, so, and this is obviously not financial advice and nor is yours. And so we're not suggesting any of these things as strategies that people should apply with their own finances. But from a mindset point of view, if I had £50,000, I don't look at £50,000 as £50,000. I look at that as £5 million. And the journey between 50,000 and 5 million is not tremendously complicated. In fact, it's a lot harder to earn 50,000 than it is to earn 5 million, because you have the entire springboard structure created for you. So, but equally, I see £500 as £50,000. And you saw £3,000 on a credit card as £100,000. And so so for anyone listening here who goes, I still can't get the jump between that and that and that, the jump is 99% based on your mindset of whether the jump is possible. And that jump being possible is 99% based on following structures that have shown that it's mathematically obviously possible, provided that you follow these things. I spoke at the Platinum Property Partners group, which is a consortia that help people get on these journeys. And I happened to arrive 3 hours early, so I listened to the half of the first day. I listened to anyway, free, I guess. People were paid money to attend, but I was the keynote speaker, so I was being paid to get there. But one of the alarming, positively alarming things was that it appeared, and Tony Robbins has just done a weekend of this, a mastery weekend, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 12-hour sessions online to many people, and the key message of that abundant mindset. I loved your take on this. Is that it is to believe that you're able to exponentially succeed. Is the hardest trick to pull. Then once that's done, the rest of it is kind of straightforward. And this has happened so many times in my life, and it never actually fails, because even if the journey goes in a different direction, the agility that you have with an abundant mindset is that you can change, you can switch. And so yes, to some financial advisors and some mentors and some business partners, they may think that you've got two heads. But what I find more bizarre is people who look at £50,000 as, well, that's going to buy me a really nice watch. And now what you've got is a really nice watch and no pounds. Whereas £50,000 is actually £5 million if you change the mindset around. And then when you've got your £5 million, you can buy yourself the £50,000 nice watch, and it's a rounding error. But anyway, what's your take?
I absolutely could not agree more than that, to the point where this was back in 2018, we sold our house. I mean, it was a nice detached house. It was no mansion. But we sold our house and we moved into a rental. And I think we had about 150K worth of equity, which obviously was in our bank. And that really catapulted that. Again, people with little understanding of money and how to leverage it were like, but you're wasting money on rent. I'm thinking, no, we've got 150 grand, which allowed us to go on and completely fast track the success that we've had today. And actually, we're still like, I have to say to my husband, because I mentioned to you, we're thinking of moving to Dubai. Well, we are going to move to Dubai in January. My husband's just back and he's terrible for spending money, because we want to take the kids out and show them the different areas that we've selected and what have you. And I'm like, when can we book this holiday? And this is how anal he is. He's like, well, if we book it now, he's like, do you know how much money that can continue to make us up until the point of booking it? I'm like, yeah, but like things aren't real unless you've got to have this is the point that we're at now. I was like, you've got to have a bit of a cutoff point where you do actually spend money and experience wealth and the flow of money, not necessarily being reckless and certainly not living beyond your means. But when you are being successful, I think making sure that you've got nice things and nice environment as well helps to sort of feed the growth mindset, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, very subtle point that you've made there that I want to uncover slightly more in terms of what we quantify as being growth. I think there's probably, from a non-scientific point of view, there's probably a majority of people, I think, would see that the only metric there is return on investment financially, whereas I see a return on investment emotionally as being equal priority. So the booking of something that makes it tangible and makes it therefore a line in the sand that you're reaching toward is worth an amount. And if you want to quantify the emotional return on investment of booking the holiday and quote unquote losing the return on investment financially between now and that point, that I believe that the only way of justifying that financial metric is by equating the emotional metric alongside it. So question, to put in simple terms, would be, is it, let's say I'm going to lose, for sake of argument, £1,000 a month for 6 months because of spending X amount on a holiday. Is it worth £1,000 a month in knowing that the holiday is in place, or is it worth less? And if it's worth less, how much is less? So is the emotional return £500 worth of emotional return per month? And it's like, okay, well, in which case we know that we'll book the holiday in 3 months' time so that we can make up the shortfall to enable that 500. And for anyone who, I don't think you can argue one half of the coin unless you also argue the other half of the coin. And in business and in life, not only do you have the return investment of financial and return investment emotional, there's a third ROI, which is risk of inaction. And that risk of inaction has to also be accounted for. So yes, there's a return investment financial risk. Yes, there should be an equated return investment emotional upside downside. But there also needs to be a risk of inaction equation. And when you have all of those three pieces of information, then you can make a decision. That's what I think.
Oh, you sound just like my husband. Honestly, you're like 2 peas in the pod. I'm getting it from every angle. No, you know what? I completely agree. And I also want to pick up on one of the other points that you made, and that Tony Robbins said. You first got to truly believe that you can achieve whatever level of success or wealth. Let's talk about financial wealth in this instance before it can happen. And I'm a great believer in that. And I think sometimes, certainly in Britain, I don't know about over in Oz. I know you vacated these bloody windy, rainy shores some time ago. But we like have a British culture of not talking about money. It's like a bit of a taboo subject. It's almost seen as being a little bit uncouth, isn't it? And what I quite like about talking with other entrepreneurs and things, not just necessarily in real estate, but the openness we kind of have when we're sharing, figures on deals. Oh, what did you buy for that bit of land? Oh, brilliant. What's the GDV? What's your upside? I really enjoy having those levels of chat with people. But to bring it back to the like our own personal scenario, I said that our goal for this year we're committed to having our biggest and best financial year yet. My number one priority was happiness above all else. And I think that, without going too woo-woo on your listeners, the sort of deep work and things that we started to put in place back end of last year really led it to that. So I had a huge financial goal, and we had to, when I first said to my husband what I wanted to achieve this year, his gut reaction was, well, that's too much of a stretch from where we are now. That's not necessarily achievable. And after sitting it down and kind of breaking it down a little bit, we both got fully on board. That was the first thing. We were both fully committed to achieving this end goal, to the point where it's everywhere, it's written down. But it didn't necessarily come from, and this is why business plans are great, but, well, in my opinion, they're not great. They're not worth the paper.
I agree.
Later on. Now, yes, you've got to have goals and targets, and this might be a little bit controversial. And the big financial goal's not going to change. But if you'd have said to us in December how we were going to achieve this, I don't mind sharing it. It's to get to £10 million by the end of the year. If you'd have said to us how we were going to achieve it at the back end of last year, it's not the direction we're going in. We got an opportunity in January, again, law of attraction, call it what you like. We got an opportunity in January, which just came out the blue, the virality of it. We jumped all over it. We're very opportunistic. We do our due diligence, and where other people might think that something's too good to be true and back away, we do our due diligence and we pounce while the iron's hot, so to speak. And that has just catapulted opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. But we pivot so much, and it was really reassuring. I had Joe Foster, who's the founder of Reebok, on my podcast, and we've actually became really good friends with him and his wife Julie. We've met up with them for lunch. They've actually been here to the house for food and what have you. And I've had the privilege of spending time with a multi-billionaire, and he pretty much said he's attended quite a few of these lectures now at university, and this isn't meant to sound disrespectful, but quite often the people at the front of the room lecturing and offering advice, they've never achieved huge financial wealth themselves. They're not multi-millionaires. They're certainly not billionaires, or very rarely. And Joe had said, like, a lot of the start with the end in mind is not applicable when you're in the trenches. You're only ever trying to get to the next step. And he said he had to do countless of these business plans to appease banks and lenders and things like that over the years. And when he'd look back at, for 3 months' time from the start of the plan or what have you, he'd think, well, we've got the financial goal, but we didn't do any of those things that we had outlined that we were going to do to get there, because we had to pivot. Things change very quickly, and you couldn't necessarily see where you wanted to go 10 steps in front, because your focus, and this is certainly something I resonate with, is to get to the next level. Like when we started in property, I didn't necessarily think we were going to be buying hotels and doing new build developments and things like that. We were constantly just honing what we were doing, evolving our business model, looking at where we can increase our ROI, and and learning about business and relationships and people and all the other things that go with it. So yeah, a bit of a tangent there, but it basically all started from believing that we were capable of achieving this big goal, which now is went from almost pie in the sky to we've got this.
Yeah, I love that. I think the what is, but there's another learning inside that you've said that I want to exemplify or amplify slightly as well, which is the ability to pivot and change course requires psychologically a removal or reduction of what's called a sunk cost trap. And the sunk cost trap, for those who aren't aware of that kind of part of human psychology, is when you've put, for instance, I'll give you an example in relationships, because I've seen that in many marriages. For instance, a sunk cost trap is, well, we've spent 17 years together, so it's kind of like, there's why throw away the 17 years? We may as well just keep going. Or someone who's invested into something, the strategy on a horse race might have gone wrong 3 or 4 times, but then that's your strategy, so you just keep at it because this is the way it's going to work. Another sunk cost trap is people who have a repeat pattern because they feel as if they're already invested into it. And so to disable the sunk cost trap and enable the ability to park ego and say, well, no, this is the strategy. A lot of people around us, well, if one isn't careful of who you spend time around, and I'm militant about that energy management, so I literally do not spend any time around people who don't share the growth kind of abundance mindset. And I don't even call this woo-woo or anything else like that. I just call it physics and energy and the quantum realm, of course, which is all real. So I find the more centralized society and governance as crazy and woo-woo. I see this, what we're talking about is normality. But nonetheless, so spending around time, people tend to say, oh yeah, well, you said you were going to do this, but then you did that, so you failed. And that traditional mindset is something which has no truck with me. I don't buy it at all. And I've stopped bothering explaining to anyone. As soon as I get into any conversation with anyone who says, yeah, well, you said you were going to, well, I thought that, this idea you had didn't work. And I used to try and explain and say, well, that idea I had taught me that actually this was the right route. And so how do you handle your agility and your pivotability? How do you handle that with people around you who point and say, yeah, well, you and your husband said you were going to go that direction, and now look at you, you've never mentioned hotels in the past. How do you handle that?
It's quite funny because your circle definitely gets smaller, that's for sure.
Uh-huh.
I mean, so I mentioned we had another couple of businesses. Give you an example. So my husband and there's actually 3 of us involved in the property business. We still got our fingers in a lot of pies, but the core business is the property. They actually launched the electrical business back in 2010. And they had very little business acumen. They both had entrepreneurial traits, but they were electricians by trade. They got a couple of apprentices. That was the only way they knew how to scale the business. And we were doing pretty well by most people's standards in the north of England. They were probably earning as sole traders prior to setting up the business 60, 70 grand a year, which isn't too shabby, but they always had higher aspirations. And in 2016, we'd started to land some really big contracts. We were up to about 18 staff, which was quite a lot for us. And we got screwed over. We got royally screwed over. We lost tens of thousands of pounds. It came down to the wire whether or not we could keep trading. And this will tell you a little about our values. My husband and his business partner went and got a bank loan to pay for the guys, and they knew we weren't going to get paid. They knew that decision could potentially be the tipping point for us having to declare bankruptcy, which thankfully we avoided by the skin of our teeth. But our definition, and I say I wasn't actively involved in the business, but for anyone who's been through this sort of situation and you're worried about getting your house repossessed and you're waking up with heart palpitations and everything else, it's very all-encompassing for the full family. And they had a serious chat. It was a real pivotal moment. And they asked the question to themselves whether or not they should just go back on the tools and get their 60, 70 grand a year. It was a horrific, stressful time in our lives. And they thought, no, there's no way that we have been through all that to not achieve success, to not take the learnings from it. But of course, that things continue to evolve. 2020, all our contracts were with sheltered housing, they were with NHS contracts, that kind of thing. They pretty much got suspended for best part of a year. And had that been our only source of income, we would have not been able to survive it. The government grants or what have you didn't come close to sustaining our business. Through that, one of our business partners, this is the point about pivoting. He was sat having a meeting. They're both called Mark, my husband and our other business partner. And he was sat there at the table. The meeting had finished up with this contractor we got a lot of work from. And he heard a conversation about fire security and needing to look for, they've got this £500,000 contract and they need to start shortlisting for that. And he's fire security, he heard that some of the lingo, Googled what accreditations you needed for that. And he says, oh, sorry to interrupt, just are you aware that we've got the whatever. And they're like, oh, Mark, no, we didn't. Obviously, we've worked with you guys for years. We can trust you. We would love to have you tender for the work. Next thing you know, we've got our project manager booked on the next day on this 20 grand's worth of training to get these accreditations, and actually that business ended up turning over almost £1 million in its first year, which propped up the other businesses. But the other point that you made was knowing when to walk away from people, but obviously, but also situations as well. And last year we got to a point where that business wasn't quite going in the direction where it should have done, and you start looking at the disproportion. It wasn't going under, and we did get screwed over and lose a big contract. But things like that happen in business all the time. We weren't going into administration or bankruptcy or anything, but when we looked at where all the stress was coming from, where all the negative energy was getting sapped from in relation to actually probably the smallest proportion of what we were earning, we made the decision to walk away from both of the businesses. You have to take away, I asked my husband, have you got any sort of emotion about this? This is something that you launched in 2010 and decades worth of history and trying to build it. And no, we're so black and white now. We're so ruthless. He's like, it's just a stress. We're at the end of the day, you've really got to trust your instincts. And sorry, I do go off on tangents, but the point you made about surrounding yourself with the right people, then I think that really helps with that, because from day one of my own journey with property, mindset, personal development, of which I was heavily involved with in my late teens, early 20s, when I was very successful. I was responsible for over 100 staff. And when I walked away from this world, this woo-woo world, that's funnily enough, my life sort of nosedive, just as a side note. But from day one, what my tagline, Jonathan, is relationships are the highest form of currency. I continually get around people that are further down the path I want to travel. And I don't just mean business. If I'm signing up for a half marathon, which I did, I couldn't run a Bath a couple of years ago. I've got a running coach. If I'm looking to learn about mindfulness, I'm reading books on breath work, and we've spoke about some of our mutual love for some of the best authors, and Viktor Frankl, and so when I say getting around people, sometimes it's through books, it's through YouTube videos, but it's also through paid masterminds, and really just working on myself, because my own very limited network before that, I'm not suggesting people go and cut off their family, but people can be some people are just negative, other people are well-intentioned, but I refused to be judged by their limitations. When people are telling me, don't get involved in property, what about Brexit, what about this, I think, well, fair enough, Dad, but you're bankrupt and 60 odd years old, living in an interest only property with no means to retire. I love you and I respect you, and I'll take a lot of advice from you, but not in the area of finances. So it's been very selective who you listen to, and also, from my point of view, I just thought, well, I'm going to listen to all the multimillionaires that are actually, living in big properties and living the sort of life that I can only dream of emulating, and look at what they're doing and try to replicate that, as opposed to some of these other people.
Yeah, and funny enough, actually, with that, it's not complicated to do that either, because I mean, I've tended to, probably about 2007, 2008, I twigged onto that. So around that time, I started to go up to, multi-millionaire, sometimes multi-billionaire people who I'd meet in various different guises in different parts of the world. And I would ask them about their story or about their journey. And I realized that all of them had one or two extremely clear lessons, and if I were to map it all on a Venn diagram, the lessons kind of ended up being the same type of thing, so that they all have one or two traits, and one of them is the ability to spot opportunity as growth, like pivotable growth opportunities. There's another one around the belief that you can leverage any of those, and the third of all, from anyone from Branson downward to secret multi-billionaires who own companies that no one would have ever heard of, but in fact keep the lights on in your house. The third learning that I had was that if you're not enjoying it, then it doesn't matter how much money you make, you're never actually going to be really successful or happy. So in closing, I'd love to hear from you, if you had to summarize the learning in 1, 2, or 3 points, and maybe some of them are the same as those 3, what would you say to listeners, just in closing, as the as what if they took nothing else from this? What would you say?
So yeah, it is really recapping what I've already said. Relationships are the highest form of currency. So be mindful who you spend your time with, and what information you allow into your mind, because there's always something, isn't it? We thought we had problems with Brexit, and then there's COVID. Now we've got World War III.
Yeah.
Switch the news off, because your thoughts really do become your reality. And last year I found myself in a situation I wasn't necessarily taking my own advice with that, but all I can say is the only thing that's changed in the world, the only thing that's changed has been my perspective, and seeing the power of the energy that can happen on a personal level and how it can transform your life. I think it's really interesting how we can potentially tap into that level of consciousness en masse to really make change with some of the big issues that we're all experiencing at the moment. So absolutely getting around the right people. I also said that your business can only grow the same extent that you do, and I truly mean that. Some of the stuff I used to find a little bit overwhelming 4 years ago, because there were so many areas in my life that I needed to change, that it was almost like information overload. You're trying to learn about wealth and business and everything like that. I've been a careers advisor at a prison. I'd never even been self-employed before, so it was such a baptism of fire. And you're trying to work on your mindset and the power of your thoughts, and then I'm becoming a bit more aware on health and nutrition and the impact that can have on you, which can be very daunting depending on where you're starting from. But also like the spiritual elements and that side of things. I really didn't think that was for people like me. Meditation and connecting to the universe. And one of the Dr. John DeMartini, who've been blessed to have on the show, he talks about every downside having an upside, and he actually refers to saying COVID, which you've got to know what he means by that. But it is said from a place of real beauty and strength on his part. And actually 2020 taught me the importance of stepping back and connecting with nature, and actually taking the time to listen to the birds when I'm out walking, and not necessarily always having to leverage my time 100 miles an hour. I listen to audiobooks on double speed. Every time I'm in the car, I'm having a podcast on, trying to cram more information and trying to be the best. But sometimes it can be a little bit unhealthy as well. And it's, I suppose, it sounds cheesy, but the more you are comfortable just being, just being, in your own skin. And I spent, I don't know, as long as I can remember, really from 12 years plus, not being particularly happy with who I was as a person. And that's something that really takes a lot of work. So the advice I would give, because that's a bit of a long-winded answer, is chunk it down. You don't need to go from 0 to 100. The compound effect of taking small actions to improve yourself every single day, being better than the person that you were yesterday, over time are astronomical. And you asked me earlier on about my first year. I never saw this transition. I mean, I'm not recognizable to the person I was 4 years ago. And hopefully if we do another one of these podcasts in 4 years, I won't be recognizable again, because there's so much that no one's a finished article. And the more I learn and the more I know and the more I explore and the more I ask questions, the more I'm aware of how little I know and how far I've still got to go. And it's just trying to see that as an opportunity, as opposed to almost being overwhelmed by it.
Wow. I would say, Ellie, that you are woke. You are a woken person. This has been wonderful. I need to finish this off now, but thank you so much. This is just the second of many conversations I think you and I will have over the time. I'm actually really envious of 4 years from now, because 4 years from now is going to be like the upgrade, like super upgrade version, and I want to know which way that goes. I could equally in 4 years' time be a total recluse, monk-like existence, or the opposite, and I don't know which way that's going to go, and I want to see which way you go as well. So listen, thanks for coming on. Quick website address for anyone who wants to follow you. How do they find you online quickest?
I am everywhere. Just Google Ellie McKay and you will see me. The podcast is on a mission. I'm going to be launching a book, in the process of writing the book at the minute. That's called Mission. That will be out by the end of the year. So make sure you sign up for that. And yeah, just drop me a message and it'd be great to connect.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ellie. You're a legend. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to stop recording now. Stay on for just 1 sec so I can thank you again.